You hear the scream before you see anything else. Raw, animal, echoing through stone corridors where the cold seeps through every wall. It's January 1457, and somewhere in the depths of Pembroke Castle on the Welsh coast, a child is dying. Or giving birth. Perhaps both. The midwives won't meet each other's eyes. They've delivered hundreds of babies, pulled life from the edge of death more times than they can count. But this is different. The girl on the bed is 13 years old. Her hips haven't finished growing. The baby inside her is positioned all wrong, too large, tearing her apart from the inside. Outside, the Atlantic crashes against the cliffs, indifferent to the agony unfolding in this freezing chamber where a widow barely past childhood is trying to bring forth England's future king. Before we go deeper into this story, I'd be genuinely curious to know where in the world you're watching from. It amazes me that we're all here, scattered across continents, connected by curiosity about a girl who suffered in a Welsh castle over 5 centuries ago. If this story grips you the way it does me, consider leaving a like. The girl's name was Margaret Beaufort, and the blood in her veins made her both precious and dangerous. She carried the lineage of John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, son of Edward III, which meant she held a thread of connection to England's throne. In the savage mathematics of 15th century politics, royal blood was currency. It could buy you a crown or a grave, often both in quick succession. Margaret would learn this lesson written in pain across her own broken body. She wasn't supposed to be here, in this remote fortress at the edge of the known world, laboring alone while her husband rotted in an unmarked grave somewhere in Wales. Edmund Tudor, Earl of Richmond, had been captured fighting for the Lancastrian cause just months earlier. The official story said plague killed him in captivity. Those who understood how political prisoners died in medieval Wales knew better. Whether disease or a blade in the dark ended him, the result was the same. Margaret, pregnant and 12 years old, had become a widow before she understood what it meant to be a wife. Her first marriage had been annulled before it was consummated. The second, to Edmund Tudor, was consummated immediately. There was no concept of waiting, no notion that a child's body might not be ready. Noble daughters were dynastic assets, and assets existed to be used. The wedding night was a trauma Margaret never spoke of in all her long years. But the evidence of what it did to her would be written in medical records, in the permanent damage that left her unable to bear another child, in the religious obsession that consumed her afterward like penance for surviving what felt like punishment from God. 18 hours she'd been screaming. The midwives had tried everything: positioning, massage, herbal concoctions that made her vomit, prayers to St. Margaret of Antioch. Dame Gwen Furch Dafydd, the head midwife, was a woman who'd seen the full spectrum of childbirth from miraculous to catastrophic. She knew the signs. The girl's pelvis was too narrow. The baby was in distress, its heartbeat irregular, and Margaret Beaufort, barely tall enough to see over the altar in the castle chapel, was bleeding internally at a rate that would kill her before dawn. Jasper Tudor paced the corridor outside, his brother's widow dying behind a door he couldn't open. He was 25, a battle-hardened commander who'd faced armed men without flinching, and he was helpless. Every scream that cut through the oak made him flinch as if struck. The child she carried was his nephew, the last ember of the Tudor line now that Edmund was dead. If both died tonight, everything died with them. The physician, Dr. Lewis Caerleon, made the decision. They would attempt manual extraction, reaching inside Margaret's body to guide the baby out by force. It was desperately dangerous. It would almost certainly render her barren even if she survived, but the alternative was watching them both die. What happened next was recorded in the physician's notes with clinical detachment that somehow makes it more horrifying. The procedure took 20 minutes. Margaret's screams gave way to gasping sobs and then to silence as her body went into shock. When the baby finally emerged, torn from her like fruit ripped from a branch, the room held its breath. The infant was gray, unmoving, covered in blood and birth matter. For 5 seconds that lasted a century, There was no sound except the crackling fire and Margaret's shallow breathing. Then Dame Gwen cleared the baby's throat with her fingers, and he gasped, coughed, began to wail with the outrage of something forced into existence against its will. Henry Tudor, future King of England, born from the shattered body of a child mother who would never fully recover. They placed him on Margaret's chest for a moment, just a moment, before rushing him to the fire. Her eyes followed him with desperate intensity, memorizing his face through waves of pain and exhaustion that were dragging her under. She tried to speak, to reach for him, but her body refused every command. When they took him away to be cleaned and swaddled, she wept silently, tears cutting tracks through the sweat on her face. The damage assessment came later, in whispered consultations between physician and midwives. Extensive tearing, internal injuries, hemorrhaging that had nearly killed her. Dr. Caerleon recorded it all with grim precision. "The Lady Margaret shall bear no more children. Her womb and privy parts have sustained injury beyond the body's capacity for complete repair." At 13, her reproductive life was finished. She'd given England one prince at the cost of ever giving him a brother. But here's what the medical records don't capture: the psychological fracture. Margaret developed an immediate, complicated relationship with the baby she'd nearly died to birth. She loved him with fierce desperation, but holding him triggered flashbacks to the trauma. She couldn't separate his presence from her pain. The castle staff whispered about it, how the lady would weep when they brought the child, how she'd clutch him and then push him away, how she'd spend hours in the chapel afterward, praying with an intensity that frightened them. Jasper Tudor understood that his sister-in-law had broken in ways that wouldn't heal, but he also saw something the others missed. As Margaret recovered through the cold Welsh winter, lying in that chamber where she'd almost died, something was crystallizing inside her. The soft, frightened child was being forged into something harder. Every prayer she memorized, every political discussion she insisted on joining despite her weakness, every question she asked about alliances and armies, she was building herself into a weapon. Because Margaret Beaufort had learned the fundamental lesson that would define her life. The world would use her, break her, take everything she had. Unless she learned to use it first. 18 months after Henry's birth, Margaret married again. Sir Henry Stafford, younger son of the Duke of Buckingham, was a political necessity. The marriage gave her protection from a world sliding into chaos as the Wars of the Roses erupted around them. Lancastrians against Yorkists, the Red Rose versus the White, two branches of the same family tree tearing England apart in a struggle for the crown. But the real strategy was quieter. Henry Tudor remained in Wales under Jasper's guardianship, safely away from the bloodletting. Margaret, meanwhile, positioned herself at the English court, building networks and gathering intelligence. She rarely saw her son, perhaps once or twice a year under carefully negotiated conditions. He grew from infant to boy to young man as a stranger, while she maneuvered through political currents that drowned stronger swimmers. The separation destroyed her in slow motion. Every missed birthday, every letter that took months to arrive, every rumor of illness or danger, it accumulated like stones in her chest. She poured her frustrated maternal instinct into coded letters and carefully selected gifts, but mostly she lived in a state of constant, gnawing anxiety, not knowing if he was safe, not knowing if he was alive. Then 1471 arrived like an executioner. The Battle of Tewkesbury annihilated the Lancastrian cause. Edward, Prince of Wales, the last direct heir to Henry VI, died in the fighting, possibly murdered after capture. Henry VI himself vanished into the Tower of London and was found dead shortly after, killed by melancholy, according to the official story. Everyone knew what melancholy with a dagger looked like. Suddenly, improbably, Margaret's 14-year-old son became the most credible Lancastrian claimant to the throne, which made him one of the most dangerous people in England. Jasper Tudor didn't hesitate. On a storm-lashed night in September 1471, he smuggled Henry aboard a ship at Tenby. They had perhaps an hour's warning before Yorkist soldiers arrived. No time for messages, no chance for goodbyes. Henry Tudor sailed into 14 years of exile in Brittany, and Margaret, in England, unaware, didn't learn her son was gone until days later. The moment she received the news was recorded by her confessor. She collapsed. Didn't speak for 2 days. When she finally emerged from her chambers, something fundamental had changed. The grief had metabolized into something colder and more dangerous than love. Her third marriage was calculated with chess master precision. Thomas Stanley, Lord Stanley, was the ultimate political survivor, a man who'd perfected the art of backing the winning side at the last possible moment. Through him, Margaret gained access to intelligence networks, military resources, and political influence that reached every level of English society. And she used them. For 14 years, while Henry lived in exile, Margaret built the infrastructure of rebellion. She cultivated relationships across political divides. She maintained communications with exiles through elaborate codes. She positioned allies in strategic households. She moved pieces on a board that stretched from Wales to Brittany to the halls of Westminster. The cost was everything soft left inside her. She became someone who could smile at enemies over dinner while plotting their destruction. Someone who could sacrifice allies when necessary. Someone who could leverage her own reputation and safety for marginal advantages in a game where the stakes were her son's life. When Edward IV died suddenly in 1483 and his brother Richard seized the throne, when the boy King Edward V and his brother disappeared into the Tower, never to emerge, Margaret saw the opening she'd been engineering for over a decade. Richard's usurpation had shattered Yorkist legitimacy. The child murders had turned him into a monster in public imagination. Henry Tudor's claim, distant and legally questionable as it was, suddenly looked like salvation. Margaret coordinated a rebellion from within England while arranging her son's invasion from Brittany. When the conspiracy collapsed and her co-conspirators were executed, she escaped death only through Stanley's protection. But even under house arrest, stripped of her titles, she continued plotting through coded messages and trusted servants. On August 22, 1485, on a muddy field near Market Bosworth, Richard III made his final charge. The Stanley forces, positioned to support the king, turned on him instead, a betrayal Margaret had orchestrated through years of careful manipulation of her husband's ambitions and fears. Richard died fighting, his crown rolling into the mud. Henry Tudor picked it up and became Henry VII. Margaret was 52 when her son took the throne. They'd spent 28 years mostly separated, 14 of those with the English Channel between them. When they were finally reunited after Bosworth, witnesses noted the strangeness of it. Two people who should have been intimately connected, meeting almost as strangers. Henry treated his mother with deep respect, but not warmth. How could he? She was an idea to him, a concept, not the woman who'd held him as an infant. Margaret became the most powerful woman in England, the king's mother, but she never recovered what had been stolen from her in that birthing chamber at Pembroke Castle. The simple bond between mother and child had been sacrificed to politics before it ever had a chance to form. She lived to see Henry establish the Tudor dynasty, marry Elizabeth of York to unite the warring houses, father the prince who would become Henry the Heath. She witnessed the stability she'd given everything to create. In 1509, just days after witnessing her grandson's coronation, Margaret Beaufort died, having traced an arc from teenage widow to dynasty founder. In Westminster Abbey, her tomb is marked with Latin inscriptions celebrating her piety and her achievements as patroness of learning. Visitors read about her founding of colleges and her support of printing. They learn she was mother to a king, but they don't hear the echo of that scream from Pembroke Castle. The sound of a 13-year-old girl being torn apart to birth a future she'd never really share. The cost written in her body, in the separation that followed, in the decades of manipulation and sacrifice that turned maternal love into something harder and stranger than nature ever intended. Perhaps that's Margaret Beaufort's real legacy. Not merely the dynasty she helped to establish or the institutions she contributed to, but the profound question she embodied. How much of yourself can you sacrifice before you become something else entirely? At what point does the girl screaming in the birthing chamber transform into the political operator who coldly maneuvers pieces on a chessboard? This metamorphosis raises unsettling questions about identity, motherhood, and the relentless pursuit of power. Was the price of Henry VII's crown paid in gold and blood? Or was it something far more insidious? A quiet, fundamental loss, a mother's chance to simply be a mother. Margaret's life was a tapestry woven with ambition and sacrifice. Born into a world where women wielded little power, her strategic marriage and relentless pursuit of her son's claim to the throne allowed her to transcend the limitations placed upon her gender. Yet this ascent came at a cost. As she maneuvered through the treacherous waters of political intrigue, the echoes of her sacrifices reverberated in the chambers of power. The crown she sought for Henry VII symbolized not just a familial legacy, but also the crushing weight of her own relinquished identity. Each calculated decision, each political alliance, demanded a piece of her soul, transforming her from a nurturing mother to a figure of cold resolve. The waves still crash against the cliffs at Pembroke, a constant reminder of the enduring nature of history. The stones of that chamber, where she once labored in pain and hope, still stand, indifferent and enduring. These ancient walls have borne witness to the cries of countless women, echoing the struggles of those who came before and after. And yet, within those walls, if you listen closely enough, you can almost hear it, the haunting sound that started everything. A child's scream, reverberating through the centuries, carrying with it a truth about power and sacrifice that history books can never quite capture. This scream is not merely an expression of pain. It encapsulates the raw essence of what it means to be human. It signifies the moment when a mother's dreams collide with the harsh realities of a world that demands sacrifices for the sake of ambition. In the stillness of that chamber, one can imagine Margaret, torn between the instinct to protect her child and the knowledge that her aspirations for him might require her to harden her heart. The paradox of motherhood becomes starkly clear. To nurture is to risk, and to love is to sacrifice. As Margaret maneuvered through the intricate web of 15th-century politics, her identity evolved. The girl who once screamed in agony during childbirth became a symbol of strength and determination. Yet at what cost? The transformation was not merely external, it permeated her very being. The political operator she became was a far cry from the hopeful mother who once envisioned a future filled with love and laughter. The ambitions that drove her were powerful, but they demanded a toll measured not in currency or titles, but in the quiet moments of joy and connection she sacrificed along the way. This legacy of sacrifice echoes through history, reminding us that the cost of changing the world is often measured in pieces of ourselves we can never reclaim. Margaret Beaufort's story serves as a poignant reminder that ambition, while powerful, can also alienate us from our most fundamental selves. It challenges us to consider the personal toll that power can exact, urging us to reflect on the delicate balance between aspiration and identity. In contemplating her legacy, we must ask ourselves, what are we willing to sacrifice for our dreams? Are we prepared to let go of parts of ourselves in pursuit of something greater? The answers are often uncomfortable, and history teaches us that the pursuit of power can leave deep scars. Margaret's life is a testament to the complexities of such choices, and her story continues to resonate, urging us to reflect on the sacrifices made by those who have come before us and the legacies they leave behind. As the waves crash against the cliffs, they remind us of the relentless passage of time, an eternal witness to the echoes of mothers who have sacrificed, endured, and shaped history. The sound of that child's scream remains a powerful symbol, a reminder of the sacrifices that lie at the heart of every ambition, every dream, and every legacy that seeks to change the world.